Listen, I was slightly alarmed to hear that you've got a fun afternoon lined up where you've got an opinion pollster followed by a load of sessions on insolvency, and it does rather suggest that you obviously get your kicks in different ways than everybody else. But anyway, it's lovely to see you. There's an element of a death by PowerPoint to this, so if you want the slides, or just email ben.page@ipsos.com. I'm sure they'll be on the BPF website, and if you like Twitter, which you should, you can tweet along and say what you think. And the first thing is I've just come hot foot from Westminster from doing sound bites on College Green outside the House of Commons. Obviously is that things are going much better than I think many people expected even as recently as February or March. At the beginning of this year, 61% of the British public said that they expected a triple dip recession this year, which just shows the public are, in fact you can probably disregard everything I'm about to say, because those are the same people, I'm going to show you their views on the high street. This is what they were saying was going to happen to the economy at the start of this year. They also said, of course, that Andy Murray would win Wimbledon, so maybe they're not all wrong. But I think the really interesting thing is this. So here is how worried the public are about different things. Now, every month since 1974 we've asked the same question. We don't show them a list. We just tell them to tell us what's on their mind, what they think the biggest problem is facing the country. And you can see that anxiety about the economy has been up there as the issue now for 5 years. But interestingly, at the moment, the number of people mentioning it is now lower than before Lehman Brothers went bust in September 2008. So it's still high by historic standards. We've never seen it go much above 40% in the past, because in the same way that all families, Tolstoy says all families are miserable in different ways. All recessions are usually miserable in different ways. But nevertheless, that's good news, I think, for most people. And when we ask people whether they think things will get better or worse, you can see that they're getting a bit more optimistic. On balance, more people expect the economy to grow than shrink in the next 12 months. And generally, there's a relationship there. Although, look at this chart going back to 1997. I think what's interesting about that chart is that for most of the time, the British public are more pessimistic below the line than optimistic. So even in this period of, I don't know if there's a pointer on here, but of huge growth, early on in the part of the century, most people were continually expecting everything to go wrong the next year. So we're a sort of very gloomy lot as a country. But overall, if you look at the direction, if you analyse the direction of travel on this chart and then you compare it to what actually happens to GDP a year later, there's actually a reasonable correlation, about 35%, which for opinion polling isn't bad. But the challenge is this, and this is what's going to be the debate running up until the May general election in 2015. The economy is growing, but do you feel better off? And so we've just told people, look, the economy is up about 1.5%. The OBR forecasts have been, now having been revised downwards, are now being revised upwards. But only 14% of people think that the growth is actually making them feel better off. 48% saying it's having no impact whatsoever. And what's been interesting this year, just very quickly, is that Labour started the year about 12 points ahead of the Conservatives. It's now down to about 6 points. And we will see how people react to the news today. Most people are not sitting in rooms like this pondering it. It's just not what they do. But the challenge is, and hence the debate that's taking place at the moment in politics, we may have a recovery, but what does that mean for living standards? And if you're in the business of retail, serving consumers, how much disposable income are they going to actually have? The Office of National Statistics is saying that real wages are now the same as, depending on when they talk, it was 2003, they've just come out and said it was 2005. But either way, we are not feeling better off. And that's, that puts lots of pressure on spending. On the other hand, we've got 40 billion expected to be spent in the run-up to the Christmas, about a fifth of that online, 450 million on Cyber Monday, lots and lots of shopping on mobile phones, and most internet access is now on smartphones. If your website, particularly if you're interested in consumers, does not work on a smartphone or a tablet, is not device neutral, you will suffer. And it's amazing that about 40% of businesses still tell us they haven't really looked at that properly yet. But we still like going to shops. So 80% of people say that they want to go and buy their groceries in store. That's where they'll do most of it. And when we talk about online, the people who actually have money, the old, who are going to be around and working longer, according to George Osborne this morning, are still, there's still huge age gaps in this. Who feels that they're getting better off in this country? It always used to be, when I was young, it was always young people that described themselves as low income. But what has happened in Britain in the last 5 to 10 years is that has flipped round, and it's now the old who are describing themselves, it's now the young who are describing themselves as poor, and the old who are describing themselves as better off. And they're not going to be shopping online. These are, of course, the forecasts for non-store sales in green compared to the rest of retailing in orange. So, massive growth in online. But it will be polarised between different groups of people. If you look at people who are older people and look at their use of smartphones, well, 90% of your kids will have a smartphone. And those of them that don't will be doing it for some sort of fashion statement. Most of the, most older people, it's absolutely flatlining at 10% in the over 65s. They can't see the point in buying a smartphone, and they will still be around and shopping for some time to come. So I think there are 5 things I would think that we might want to think about in terms of what happens to people buying things and shopping, and that is, first of all, how physical and virtual, link. Do we, and we've talked about this before at BPF conferences, but do we actually need to have large amounts of stock in shops if we can have near-time or real-time, almost real-time fulfillment? Amazon talking about drones that will, you might see it and it will drop it right through. But some retailers I've sat talking about, they've actually done fulfillment within an hour of somebody looking at something in a shop. So does that mean that we don't need as much space on the high street? What does that mean for warehouses? That's certainly coming. Huge issues around technology, and the retailers that invest in that are going to benefit. So, you will walk in there and it will immediately start flashing on your phone. These are all the latest offers. Huge issues about how we sort of build more brand content. One of the interesting things in the world of e-commerce at the moment, or just media generally, is, BT now is a big sports producer. A telephone company is now all about sport. Netflix is making drama. Sky is making drama. Sky is doing broadband. So there's convergence in all sorts of areas, and we'll see retailers starting offering entertainment, their own channels, all of those sorts of things. Social shopping. How do retailers link in with people's burgeoning and continually burgeoning social media habits? And in particular, how do they manage to, and it's back to this sort of physical and virtual world, how do you link the physical store and all of the money that you spend on your physical store to the virtual world and build this sort of relationship between the two? And how do you project your authenticity, not just with your staff, which I want to come back to, but also online? And the people, again, who get that right will do amazingly well. And the whole near-field communication, smartphone-powered loyalty, as we've called it here, again, for the people who get that right, will be massive. 70% of consumers say that they would leave a retailer who sold their anonymous, just stress, anonymous data to somebody else. Now, given that Tesco has been doing that for years and years and years, they're not doing pretty brilliantly at the moment, but they're not collapsing. It just shows that there's huge potential there, but there's also huge anxiety. But we will get things like, here's a coupon, why don't you come in? We just spotted that you were in the high street. And 30% of mobile companies' clients are signing up to that sort of deal. This is, how they're going to try and make money in the future. So we've got a sort of world where, in the immediate aftermath of the shock in 2008, lots of, very price-sensitive behaviour, really risk-averse, quite regressive, with sort of occasional treats. The idea of a Marks and Spencer's ready meal as a treat for shoppers. And again, most people in this room, very, very abnormal. We've just done a survey of lawyers. Could the lawyers in the room put your hands up, please? Okay, it's good to see you all. Be very careful what I say next. But we did a survey of lawyers recently for an outfit called the Resolution Foundation, and the average guess of the average wage was £90,000 a year, which suggests that some people may have got their ideas a bit twisted, given that it's under 30,000. But anyway, in the future, I think we're still expecting to, even though we're coming out of the recession, A, we aren't feeling better off, and secondly, people are scarred, so their mental behaviour isn't suddenly going to flip back to sort of David Beckham type, behaviour. There will be some people somewhere, and if you're in London, the main thing to remember about where we are now is that, as Stephanie Flanders of the BBC puts it, this is a shit country with a great city attached to it, and we are in that great city. But for those of you those of you who do occasionally go to Middlesbrough or some of the other places in this country will know that everything isn't quite like it is in Marylebone High Street. And that is something that is accelerating. And High Speed 2 may make it different, or it may just mean that even more people from Middlesbrough can get down here and do their shopping here. So lots and lots of people angsting over, what happens to our high streets. We have this, high streets are a little bit like libraries. Everybody loves libraries, but far more of them love them than actually use them. And there's an element of that we see about high streets. They're sort of totemic things. We are the first shopping nation in the world, first to industrialise, first to have the middle class, first to have retail as experience. But obviously we're angsting. And, I quite like this quote. It's almost like we've got more visions than Mother Teresa had in terms of what happens next. We've seen reviews, pilots, future high street forums and more. None of these initiatives are making much impact, and there was a frustrating sense of policy being conducted at the margins. The need to grasp the nettle is bigger than ever. And the usual reason why Number 10 or anybody in government doesn't do something, if anybody's ever dealt with these people, these are my main clients, and I love them to bits. If there was something easy and quick that Number 10 or CLG or Eric Pickles or anybody else could do about something, they would do it just like that. And the reason they don't is because it's often very, very complicated. But in terms of the latest polling that we've done for BPF on this, I think that, there is a very strong value that people attach to High Street. We've talked about the main shopping street where you live. And the interesting thing is we've got 3/4 of the population saying that they go there at least once a week. 3/4 of people actually still want, go to a high street at least once a week. That is a huge number of people. The other thing, there are lots of myths about Britain. One is that everybody, nobody knows anymore and everybody's moving all the time. Half the population in Britain still live within 50 miles of where they were born. Again, you wouldn't necessarily believe that if you read the Sunday Times. So we've got most people who say that, even online shoppers are still going to their local high street at least once a week. If they don't have a car, it goes up to 80%, but it's 73% of those with a car. We'll come back to car parking, because if you can lay on beautiful car parks, of course, it does help. And most people, we can only find 6 people in 100 who would disagree with the proposition that our local area would be worse off without the high street. Everybody agrees with that proposition. So people love the idea of their local high street. 5 out of 10 or even more, would strongly agree with that, and 91% say it's important that the local high street is doing well. And the challenge is, you say that, but then will you go and spend your money there? Or will you spend it with Amazon? I sit in conferences with sort of charitable types and people from the left of British politics, and they all bemoan the death of the high street and how Amazon is decimating jobs, etc. I then ask them, have you bought anything from Amazon recently? The entire audience put their hands up. And this is the challenge. But still, lots of things that people would rather buy in person than online. And, how we combine those things is absolutely vital. I'm fascinated to see what the head of Burberry does when she joins Apple. If you go to Burberry to buy clothes, the online experience is there, it's integrated, and that is, clearly the way to go. Apple are not stupid. They may be many things, but they are not stupid. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, there are challenges. There are lots of people who, perhaps, if you look at daily usage, it falls down quite considerably. So it's only once a week. Older working class people, more likely to say that they go every day. Most people not necessarily going there by choice. They may be going there because there is nowhere else in their area to get stuff. If you don't go there as often, the proportion of people who say that it's vital starts to fall. So if we are seeing a pattern where gradually footfall is diminishing, then loyalty will gradually fall away. But nevertheless, even with people who rarely go there, they still want to think that it's doing well. And the question is, what does that actually mean? Because I quite like this one. Actually, it's not altruistic. We can't go and tell them that the high street we must do things like pay more taxes or do anything else in order to let the high street survive. It's all about pleasure, however one defines it. And so the question will be, what do we do in terms of giving people something that they actually enjoy? So, out-of-town shopping centres are nicer places to shop than the high street. More people will agree with that than disagree. Well, there are still 3 in 10 people who will disagree. So it's not, the game is not over. And what comes out of all of this and all of the reviews is, as the total offer, the total environment is still really, really important. When we look at it around the country, most people in Scotland, most people in London and the northwest saying, you know, out of town is nicer. Interestingly, where I come from, Devon, Cornwall and Gloucestershire, etc., only 31%. Now, that may just be that we've just got rubbish out of town or none at all. But you know, it does vary around the country. But nevertheless, there is this general idea that it's going to be an easier experience driving to Westfield than it is trying to get into the middle of town and everything else. And most people tend to think that things are either staying the same or getting worse. Only 18% think their local high street is improving. And there are some big regional splits again. If you know, older people, perhaps with rose-tinted spectacles, more likely to say the high street's got worse. They might well be right, but that's their perception. And only in London are people more likely to say the high street's got better than worse. But of course we're back to money following investment and money following money. Only London. And London, you know, undoubtedly has got better. But the question is, what about the rest of the country? And you will have to make your decisions about where you invest your money. So in terms of solutions, we've asked people as a whole, what would make you go there more? A better selection of shops. And, you know, I am a Marylebone High Street person. I go there every week, several times. And, of course, it's got a beautifully curated selection of shops. I've been really interested. Some of the units where they haven't worked out, the estate has recently chopped them up into smaller ones, which all seem to be going quite well. And it's made it better. So I think how we do curation and what deals you're prepared to accept in order to get a more attractive selection of people in there is a really interesting one. You know, is it just about having a Waitrose or a Tesco or something like that to pull everybody else in, or are there some other mixtures that we can get in there? And all of that stuff about variety and selection is right up there, followed by obviously things like cafes, things like parking. Pedestrian only doesn't particularly come in there. Less traffic, not particularly coming in there. So it is all about the utility and efficacy of the shopping offer, plus some of the things around it, but not about pedestrianisation. You've got a few people worried about betting shops or, you know, some more speciality shops, but generally that curation seems to stand out to me. And when we look at people who don't go there very often, just take those and look at those alone, you get the same sorts of patterns, slightly more people mentioning parking than in the previous sample. So it's obviously clearly parking is an issue. If you can get more parking, you will get more people if we can get rid of congestion charges and everything else. But generally still, this whole issue of curation comes out as a key issue. And, you know, there are, generally most people will come out of this. There are some interest, if you've got kids, if you're younger, the younger more well-heeled, more interested in cafes and restaurants to hang out in. Older people, of course, more nostalgic. Although the young have that in droves in Britain. It's one of the things that unites this country completely, is the fact that heritage is the best thing about Britain, and that doesn't matter whether you're young or old, we all agree with that. But older people in particular want, you know, say they want local shops, say they want independent shops, etc. So there are some differences, but generally we're still back to curation. Now, one option, of course, is just to pull all of that stuff into your own store. So, you know, John Lewis, there's barbers, post offices, the high street under one roof. You may see a bit more of that. It's not going to fundamentally change things. I do think this point in the Grimsey review, you know, trying to bring all of those things together is really important. And local government is, I think, you know, helping in some places. Local politicians are, you know, much maligned, but actually local government is coping quite well with 35% reductions in spending. Most people say they haven't noticed any changes to the services provided by local government so far. The number one thing that they have noticed is potholes, which now in Britain, if put together, will cover the Isle of Wight. But local government is saying that the pips really are squeaking, so anything we can do to help them will be important. So I think getting that sort of community mindset, which some of the big builders, some of the big developers are already doing, I think clearly stands out. And I'd just say, in summing up really, I think the challenge in all of this, whatever we do in the economy, whatever sort of job we have, you know, is to remember Einstein. Because what does he say? He says, the greatest insanity is to continually do the same thing over and over again, and expect something different to happen. And when we're faced with, you know, consumers who are grumpy and anxious, an economy that isn't yet fixed, with a huge deficit, we've got to try something new. Because in all of that, people, although technology changes, people don't change very much. And how we manage our people, how retailers manage their people, will make huge differences. There will be retailers who shouldn't work. They shouldn't work.
But actually, because of the way they run that business, because of the way they motivate their people, nothing to do with pay and bonuses, they will outperform. And the biggest things that differentiate different businesses in our work have no relationship to pay, but all about, not even friendly bosses actually, but it's all about people feeling listened to, feeling empowered, and being told how they're doing. And so some businesses will buck the trend, whatever happens. But it will be, very, very challenging. So good luck with your conference. The British public still love the idea of the basic product. We just have to make it live up to their dreams. Thank you.